First Things First is sponsored by Gillette, the best a man can get.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thursday, but more importantly, welcome to First Things First. I'm Jenna Wolf. That's the Hall of Famer, Chris Carter. That is Nick Wright. And here's something I learned last night, guys. Nick Wright does not sleep with his ringer turned off.
No.
Anyone want to know why I know that? Because I texted Nick at 2 o'clock this morning.
2 o'clock this morning.
Because of a great game that Joe Ingles had last night. It was something we had talked about, because all I think about is you at all hours of the night. To which you responded.
I didn't respond. It was 2 a.m. The basketball game had ended 90 minutes prior.
Nothing. I thought we were going to talk. We're going to have a conversation. Tomorrow morning, keep your phone ringer off, because I'll be texting you at 2 o'clock in the morning with some news and notes that I have about the game.
Jenna, whatever you need, we're here for you. Okay?
Jenna texted me at 2 a.m. Chris Carter broke 2 of my knuckles today in some feat of strength that I didn't know we were engaged in. Literally dropped me to my knees. I'm not sure why that's how
we started. Was it with a high five?
No, I brought it upon myself to a degree.
No problem. It was in the show at 1:30. You got 2 complaints.
Okay. Fair point. Fair enough.
Good morning. Let us talk about that basketball game that you finished watching 90 minutes ago. Memo to those who had the Houston Rockets cakewalking to the Western Conference Finals. 2 things. 1, the Utah Jazz were never going to let that happen. And 2, cakewalking, much like moonwalking, won't get you too far. The Rockets now know that. Utah beat them in Game 2 last night. 116-108 was the final. That series is all evened up now. Jazz rookie Donovan Mitchell put up 17 points. That's not the big news. The big news was the highlight of the night, an insane putback one-handed slam to send the Jazz bench into a frenzy. It was impressive. It was definitely a highlight. Dunks aside, we've got a series now. So, CC, how big of a deal is the Jazz stealing home court from the Houston Rockets?
It's a tremendous deal. And not only just because to get the series tied up 1-1 from the obvious, but, you know, we talked about, you know, where would they struggle? What are their nightmares? What are the things that they fear? Struggling in the playoffs. Chris Paul, how would they be able to finish games? That's one of the things we thought. This offense and this team was so different, not only because the depth for which they had, but how they could close out games. They had multiple ways they could close you out. We saw during the season, they moved the ball an awful lot. Chris Paul took over the point late in games to orchestrate the offense. And last night, you saw them basically just go to the pick and roll. If it wasn't James Harden coming off the pick and roll, Capella rolling to the hoop, they didn't have anything to counteract what Utah was doing. But Utah, what they did was they assaulted the three-point line, especially the first 3 quarters of the game. That was a huge difference. You would have thought that Utah, the way they shot the 3 and the way they went after the 3 ball, that they were Houston. So the styles seemed like they flipped. And Houston has to figure out in some of these playoff games, what if they don't get to their magical number as far as, I know they have a certain number of threes they want to shoot. Can they win games if they don't get to that number? Because I think they do. They want to shoot at least 43s a game. They want to make at least 16 of them. Right. So last night they were a little short. Last night they only shot 37. They were closer there, but they only made 10. So that's the, I mean, what's the counterpunch is what you're asking. And the Rockets haven't needed much of one this year. This was, you mentioned three-point line. I'm not as concerned as you are for this reason. I'm not concerned about the three-point line. What I loved was Utah adapted a style that's been very successful. You know, but when you have not had sustainable long-term playoff success, when you've been James Harden, when you've been the coach, when you've been Chris Paul, you don't expect to wake up today in the series to beat 1-1.
Sure, absolutely. I don't think the Rockets ever expected, oh, we're going to sweep Utah. Just like I don't think they really expected to sweep Minnesota. What they didn't expect, though, was to lose a home game in the series. It's one thing for it to be 2-1 or 3-1 because you lose one of the games in Utah. It's another thing entirely if all of a sudden, as you mentioned, they've stolen home court advantage. The reason that I don't think the Rockets are going to have trouble with the Jazz moving forward in this series, even though the next 2 games are in a very hostile environment in Salt Lake, is because this was an outlier performance in a negative way for the Rockets from the three-point line. This team won 65 games this year. But if you just look at how often did this team only hit 10 threes like they did last night? 7 times all year. They hit 10 or fewer threes. They were 3 and 4 in those games. So another way to look at it is 10 or fewer threes, they're a sub-500 team. When they hit more than 10, they were 62-13 on the season. Like, they overwhelmingly, 90+% of the time, they don't have three-point shooting nights like this. Now, it'd be nice to have a counterpunch, but you don't necessarily need a counterpunch if your go-to punch is one that is landed 90% of the time, if it's the way you have gotten to where you are in the season. And the other thing that happened last night that I don't think will happen again in this series is you take out the Rockets' big three. Harden, Chris Paul, Capella. Capella was good. Harden, Chris Paul, I think it was like B-level games for them. Everyone else on the team was 11 of 39 from the field. Like, everyone other than the big three went cold for them last night.
You mentioned that this was an outlier game from them, but what's the one thing that we've really been talking about them from midway through this season to the end is that this is a team that has question marks in the postseason. For whatever reason, no matter how dominant they've been in the regular season, the postseason comes, and what I'm hearing from both of you and from everyone else is, for whatever reason, if it's Mike D'Antoni or if it's the players, they can't seem to get it all together. So, Cece, was this an outlier game, or is this the same part of the same narrative that we've been talking about for a while?
I can't say it's an outlier game. They've played 2 games in the series. Utah is a well-coached team. It wasn't like Utah played way above their head. If you look at the quarter scoring, they played 8 quarters. How many quarters has Utah outscored Houston?
6 of the 8?
Yes, and that's significant. No, it's not an outlier. When you got 6 of the 8 quarters where they've outscored them, 3 of the 4 quarters yesterday, they gave up more than 28 points. So if the Rockets aren't going to play defense, the difference besides Chris Paul being in the lineup and P.J. Tucker being in the lineup this year and them having more depth, them having more ball handlers was last season, they were 26 in defense. This year, they were 6 in defense as far as points given up. They looked like the team from the season past. They didn't look like this year's team. So, for me, I don't think it's an outlier. You've played 8 quarters. They've outscored you. Now, and your forte is scoring. So, when their shots aren't going in, what's the level of defense are they going to play? Are they going to be like the team they used to be before they got Chris Paul and P.J. Tucker and be 26? Or are they going to be the team that won 65 games and was 6th in the league?
Listen, if I'm concerned about something for the Rockets, it actually dates back to the Timberwolves series, which is getting too comfortable with slow starts. Now, game 1 of this series against Utah, this quarter they did outscore them was the first quarter. They blew them out, and essentially they won that game in game 1 midway through the second quarter. But the last 3 games they played against Minnesota, all 3 of those games, they trailed at halftime. Now, they had these monster third quarters to overcome that. Last night, it looked like that's what it was going to be again. They were down 11 at the half, 9 or 11 at the half, and they end up, I think it was an 11-point game at the half, they end up taking the lead 4 minutes into the third quarter.
That's one of the reasons why I believe this win is so significant, because you have to watch the game. Utah was playing amazing. The Rockets, they storm all the way back. They take the lead. Mm-hmm. Utah finishes them off in the fourth.
It's hard to do against
in Houston. I mean, they scored 30 points on them in the. Right. This game could have been won by either team. So for me, I'm looking at it as this Utah team, they have tremendous momentum. And now I believe Houston gets home court advantage. I believe they do win one of the games. So now it becomes a best of 3. But looking at what Golden State, because it's not only what you're doing, you got to keep an eye on what's going on in your conference. Golden State up 2-1. Golden State's going to at least probably be 3-1.
They're up 2-0. Golden State up 2-0.
They're up 2-0.
Yes.
They're going to win one of the games in New Orleans. They're going to be 3-1. You don't want Golden State and Steph and them getting that additional rest over you. So anytime you lose at home in the playoffs, I believe it's significant. We were concerned about Cleveland when they lost at home. We should be concerned about the Rockets when they lose.
I have, especially in this matchup, going into last night, Utah had played Houston 5 times. They were 0-5 in those games. If they lose, you said you think Houston will be able to win one of the games in Utah. If they only win one of the games in Utah, I'll be with you if it gets down to a best of 3. I think Houston comes back. I think the next game that's played in Houston, Houston has a 3. The point I agree with the most, though, is what the Rockets can't have happen is their defensive intensity be directly correlated with how good their offense is going. You can't have games, I thought Barkley made this point at halftime, and I thought he was right, that this team has the ability, unlike last year, because of the addition of Tucker, because of the addition of Babamuti, because of the addition of Chris Paul, they have the horses to be an excellent defense. You can't let your defensive effectiveness, effort, or execution, leaving Joe Ingles wide open repeatedly, lag because you're not creating the energy from hitting shots. That's something that needs to be consistent, whether or not the three-point ball is working.
That's what I texted you about. Joe Ingles leading the Jazz with 27 points last night.
Very good.
Yeah, and Donovan Mitchell, who only had 17, so fun to watch night in and night out, which you mentioned before he even was born. So that was good. Thank
Barkley
you
also said that basketball was a lot more fun when the ball goes in.
Yeah.
Listen, I
enlightening.
Captain Obvious. Awesome. Thank you, Sir Charles. Let's talk some football. Coming up, so much more about Tom Brady. Is he negotiating the end of his career? Wait till you hear how much longer he wants to play. Or you can ask his wife that question. That's next on First Things First.
Oh, you got to get it clear with the wife now. That's a real thing.